following all the positive response to our wireless training, which was conducted last month, we've decided to bring another topic which has been frequently requested. So Firewall Solutions is our second training for the year 2021. Let's kick things off with a brief about me. A lot of you would have interacted with me over the phone or via emails or met me over the webinars that we conduct on our YouTube channel. My name is Java, and I'm an IT sales specialist here at Island Technology. Today's course will not only consist of some background theory and a bunch of videos, but also hands-on demonstration of the practical exercises that are covered in the workshop manual. The key purpose of today's session is to equip you, our resellers, our partners, with the information that you need to be more productive in your workplace. Do remember to stick around at the end to fill out our survey and qualify for $100 off of your reseller pricing for Vigor 2962 or the 2962P or our flagship Vigor 3910. I need to mention that the offer is limited to 1 unit per participant, and it's valid till the end of September. So that's the 30th of September. It's time to begin. So let's start off by introducing our team today. I'm going to pass you on to Edward, Harvey, Darren, and Roy, who are going to tell you a little bit about themselves. Over to you guys.
Hello guys, I'm Edward. So I'm a network engineer working at DrayTek Australia, New Zealand, and I've been working with Island for 5 years. So yeah, and it's a privilege to work from there. So I learned a lot regarding networking on DrayTek technology. So I'll pass you to Harvey.
Hi guys. Yes, my name is Harvey. I've been network engineer at Island Technology for nearly 4 years now. Today I will present 2 hands-on training experience on screen, and we'll be able to discuss that also. So now I'll pass you on to Darren.
Yep,
Roy.
that'll do. Roy.
Yep. Talk about myself. Okay, my name is Roy Panetta, and I'm the technical manager at Island Technologies, and I've been here for about over 13 years now, and I'm involved in providing technical support and also providing things like training courses and application notes and preparation of these courses as well. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Roy,
Yep,
I cannot
no
see
worries.
your camera.
No, I can.
It's all good.
Okay. It's
You're all right.
It's fine.
Okay, so and I hope you get out of this course, and I'd like to hear your feedback as well at the end, see what you think of it. So I'll put you on to perhaps Darren can tell you about himself as well now.
No worries. Hi everyone, I'm Darren. I don't know how many of you have met me. I'm the Queensland sales rep up here in sunny Queensland today. So anyone else here from Queensland? Hopefully there's a couple of you. Just keep in mind that I'm here if you ever have any problems that I can help out with. We also sometimes arrange for stock pickups from here if you're nearby, or if it's easier. I do keep a small amount of stock in the office here, but we can get stuff shipped here if need be as well. All right, that'll about do for me. Who are we going to now? To Ming or back to Java? Someone let me know. I'll leave it up to you, Edward. You switch it on to whoever wants to talk.
Okay.
No worries.
Back to you, Java. So
All right.
let's start our session.
Thanks for that. All right. So that was our team for the day. Before we begin, I'm going to quickly go over some basic housekeeping items. Do ensure that your microphones are muted during the training session. We want to keep things as smooth as we possibly can. If you do wish to make a comment, all you got to do is raise your hand and we'll allow you to speak. You can always type a question, at any time in the chat box, and be assured that we will be looking at them and provide feedback during the session. And we're going to have a bunch of hands-on demonstrations as well, so you can raise your hand if you need further explanation about what's being shown on the screen. Please remember that the session is being recorded, so if you do not wish to be viewed in the same, you can simply switch off your camera. And we're going to be using Microsoft Teams. So let me quickly go over some tips on using Microsoft Teams in case some of you may not be familiar with this application too much. Up on the top of your Teams window, you'll see a bunch of icons. Depending on the size of your window, in the middle somewhere, you'll see 3 dots. Just click on those and you'll see all of the other options available. The main one you might want to use is the device settings. In newer versions of the Teams app and in the web browser version, the toolbar will appear if you simply mouse over the window. These icons may be different. The order could be a little different. So that's going to show you your audio, your speaker, the microphone, and the camera options if you're having any trouble with any of those. And towards the right, up the top, you'll see icons for your camera and mic. If you want to turn your camera off or mute your mic, just click on those. They're going to appear with lines through them to indicate that they're off, of course. And I need to mention you will still be able to see and hear us. I hope everyone's comfortable using the application. We do have override buttons, so we can turn the microphones off. We can't turn them on again for you. So if you want to speak up towards the end of the session, or want to join in the discussion, don't forget to unmute your mic first. And on the left here is the icon that shows you the participants. Just click on that and you're going to see everyone present in the meeting listed at the right hand of the window. The next one along is the chat icon. If you click on it, it opens the chat box on the right of the window where you can see any comments that are going on and you can add your own. And down the bottom, where it says type new message, you can also attach files and add, GIFs and stickers and emojis and so on. Just press enter to submit after you're done, or just click on the arrow at the bottom right. In our previous training, a few of you were in a mood to play around, so share your best memes with us if that's your thing. The third one is where you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question or you want to contribute something. Just click on that and it's going to show you the option plus a few others. The one on the far right is the one to select to raise your hand. It will then display beside your name in the show participants display where we'll hopefully see it and call out your name. Don't forget to unmute your mic, as I mentioned earlier, and be aware that we're still sort of getting used to all of this as well. So my apologies in advance if we miss seeing your hand raised. If that happens, please type your question in the chat box and one of the other team members should respond to you there. This is the schedule for today's workshop. And after the conclusion of introductions, there's going to be 2 sessions, 1 and 2, which will be running for about 45 minutes each, followed by a 15-minute general discussion. If you'd like to grab a cuppa, we're going to have a quick 5-minute break between sessions 1 and 2. So for part 1 of the workshop, which would be handled by yours truly, we're going to start off with some firewall basics. Then we look at the firewall facilities that are available in DrayTek routers, followed by the firewall config options that are listed here. And after the short break, Darren's going to take over with the second part, where he looks at some of the more advanced firewall features in DrayTek routers, things like CSM and using objects in firewall configuration. You can find the full content of the course in our training manual, which has been shared. And we've added page references at the bottom right-hand corner on each slide. So those are going to be useful. All right. looks like it's time to begin. Let's start by discussing Firewall Basics. Well, as most of you know, a firewall is a network security system which monitors and controls the incoming and outgoing network traffic based on predetermined security rules. These are usually the first line of defense in any network. Their role is to establish a barrier between the secured and controlled internal networks that can be trusted and untrusted outside networks such as the internet. It's important to remember that firewalls cannot protect against viruses that are coming from, infected media, such as office documents or an infected USB stick that a staff member might bring in on a USB flash drive. And why we use them is a bit of a no-brainer. It provides a security by allowing and blocking traffic based on IP addresses, protocols, and ports. In this rather colorful example on your screen, a computer on the local area network can easily access the internet because it's granted permission to do so. Whereas an attacker who wants to access a server through the Windows remote desktop cannot get through because they've been blocked by the firewall. And firewalls also provide security over a number of online threats, such as remote logins, Trojan backdoors, session hijacking, DOS and DDoS attacks, and viruses and cookie stealing, among others. As I mentioned earlier, firewalls work by allowing or blocking traffic based on the IP address, protocols, and ports. There are several good videos out there on YouTube about what a firewall is and how it works. I'm particularly fond of the animated one that's published by the Password Videos. Do check it out when you have the time. There's a link there on your screen now. And talking about firewall types, broadly speaking, there are two. The first is network firewalls, which are software applications that run on general purpose hardware or a dedicated hardware-based firewall computer. This includes DrayTek routers. Examples would be what you see on your screen, the Vigor 2865, the 2962, the 2927, etc. And the other type is host-based, which basically means it's software that's running on one host that's controlling traffic in and out of that single machine. The example is the Windows firewall that's running on the Windows OS. Other ones are Zone Alarm, pfSense, and Glassware, etc. Okay. First of several quiz questions that we've scattered through today's session. This one's quick. This one's super easy. So, do you still need to use an antivirus software if you buy a DrayTek router? Please raise your hand to answer this, or simply use the chat box to write your answer. Here's looking at all of you. Yes, 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 and yes. Okay. Yes, you do. That's right. And the reason, as I mentioned, is that the firewall gives protection against online threats like hackers and malicious attacks, but they can't stop a PC from becoming infected with a virus that is coming from a source like downloaded applications or infected files that people bring into your office with over a USB drive. Okay, so how about another one? This one's simply to check if you've been paying attention. I mentioned two categories of firewalls. What are they? Let's just raise your hand or use the chat box like you did earlier. Okay, no answers so far. There you go, James. Good on you. Excellent. Mark and Tom, good job. I mentioned two types, broadly speaking. The first is network firewalls, and the second is a host-based firewall. Of course, we're keeping things simple. let's drill down further. Going to expand on what we already know, and we're going to have a look at the different firewall categories. The first one is packet filtering firewalls. This one's the simplest form, and it's typically a router that has the capability to filter some of the contents of the data packets which are in the layer 2 and 3 of the OSI model. The type of information or the firewall uses for packet filtering includes source and destination IP address, the layer 3 protocol, that is the TCP/IP protocol such as your IP, ICMP, OSPF, TCP, UDP, among others. Layer 4 protocols, that would be TCP and UDP port numbers, and the interface of sent or received data. With packet filtering, data packets are either blocked or passed if they match a configured firewall rule. As you can imagine, these do have some limitations. They can be a little complex to configure. They can't prevent application layer attacks. They are susceptible to certain types of TCP/IP protocol attacks, and they don't support user authentication of connections. DrayTek routers, mind you, have additional firewall features that help to overcome some of these limitations. The next category is stateful firewalls. Unlike packet filtering, stateful firewalls keep a track of the state of a connection, whether it is in an initiation or data transfer or the termination state. This is useful when you want to deny the initiation of connections from external devices, but want to allow your users to establish connections to these devices and permit the response to come back through the stateful firewall. And the last category is application gateway firewalls, or AGFs, which are commonly called proxy firewalls. These filter information at layers 3, 4, 5, and 7 of the OSI model. And since they process information at the application layer, most of the firewall control and the filtering is done in software, which provides much more control over traffic than, say, a packet filtering or a stateful firewall. In DrayTek routers, application layer firewalls carry out further inspection of data packets to accept or deny them based on the application. For instance, you can block all of the HTTP traffic to Facebook. DrayTek routers combine the IP filter and the application filter into one filter rule that you can see on your screen. The IP filter section allows you to enter source and the destination address, as well as the service type for the criteria and the action. And at the bottom part of the configuration menu, you have the application filter, where you enter criteria for several applications, such as app enforcement, URL content filter, web content filter, and DNS filter. Well, that's all well and good, but let's look at how these filters work. Imagine a data packet that's entering a router. It will be checked if the IP header matches the IP filter criteria that's set up in a rule. If there's a match, the IP filter will either drop or accept it according to the action that's specified to that rule. If it isn't dropped, the application filter is going to be used for layer 7 filtering. Vigor routers can have up to 84 filter rules to apply different policies on different IPs. Routers have 12 filter sets with 7 rules each. That gives us a total of 84. And this is ample for most network installations. So like I mentioned, when a data packet enters the router, it's going to be checked against the IP filters. The firewall filters are applied in sequential order. So if there are multiple filters that get matched, the smallest index number is the one that gets chosen. So it's important that you configure the firewall rules in the correct order, or you're going to see unexpected results. For instance, you may wish to block a particular IP address, but having another rule that permits it in another filter set will result in different outcomes depending on the order in which these rules are checked. A detailed description of the firewall checking sequence is going to be covered in your workbooks. Just head over to pages 14 through 19. It will include flowcharts.
Sorry, Java.
Yes, Harvey.
Sorry, Edward, I can't get the DrayTek Firewall Power presentation on the screen. Am I wrong? I just get Java and Spotlight.
I can see on my end. About
Okay.
you guys.
Because I've got a monitor here. Maybe.
If you see
Okay.
the presentation down at the bottom right of the screen, Harvey, just click on that. It's going to
Okay.
pop it up.
Okay,
Works?
sorry. Okay, thanks.
Okay.
That's
There you
good.
go.
Palmer said he can see it, and
Okay.
also
Nice. I hope everyone else can see it. Any issues at all, use the chat. The team's on standby.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Moving on. As I was saying, just head over to pages 14 onto 19 on your workbooks. If you want to have a detailed look of what the firewall checking sequence is, you're going to see flowcharts there for both the Dray OS as well as the Linux-based routers. As I mentioned, I'm just going to cover the basic. Let's look at some additional features in DrayTek routers. We're going to drill down into everything in today's session. I'm just setting the tone for the day. Okay. In addition to packet filtering firewall, DrayTek routers include additional features, including stateful packet inspection and defense setup. We'll be going over these later. And before we go any further, I want to make sure that you understand the difference between a stateless and a stateful firewall. So stateless firewalls are simpler, and they make their filtering decisions based on the source and the destination IP address, the protocols and port numbers. When you compare this to a stateful firewall, in which, addition to everything that the stateless firewalls do, these also look at the state of the data packet in your data flow. So here's an example for a stateless firewall. When the laptop tries to connect to the server, the firewall will check that the source and the destination IP address, as well as the protocol and the ports, match the rules before allowing any traffic through. The rules are read sequentially, so we're going to start at rule 1 and then rule 2 and then so on. As you can see, the second rule is to pass immediately. Now looking at the exact same scenario through a stateful firewall, which will associate a packet to a state before it makes any decision. So for our example, the laptop's going to connect to the server using a telnet protocol, and the stateful packet inspection, or SPI, is used. The router is going to create a table called a state table, which will record the state of the packet that passes through the firewall. In this example, the TCP three-way handshake process is going to be used to establish a connection. So when the laptop tries to connect to the server using telnet protocol, it will send the TCP flag SYN to the server, which will pass through the router. The router is going to record the TCP flag in its state table and also looks into the firewall policy. Now, when the request reaches the server, that's number 2 there, the server will reply with the TCP flag SYN and ACK. The router will again record the TCP flag on the state table. And finally is step 3, where the laptop will reply with the TCP flag ACK. And after this 3-way process is completed, the telnet session is established between the laptop and the server. So what happens if the server sends a TCP flag SYN and ACK first? What will the router decide to do with it? Since the DrayTek router is a stateful firewall, it is going to check the state table to see if the TCP flag SYN has been received before allowing the data through. Otherwise, this connection is going to be dropped. Okay, so here's an easy one. What is the difference between a stateless firewall and a stateful firewall? Just type your answer in the chat box. This one's easy. We've discussed this just now. There you go. Excellent. So the answer, as I discussed earlier, is the stateless firewall, which is your packet filtering firewall. They make their filtering decision based purely on the source and the destination IP address and ports. While talking about stateful firewalls, they associate a packet to a state and can make decisions based on the source and destination IP address, ports, and the state of the packet. Okay, now look at the default data filter. NetBios is a transport protocol that's used in Windows computers to share resources. As you can imagine, it's a rather popular target for hackers and is also used by some internet worms to infect other Windows computers. This runs over TCP and UDP ports 137 to 139. So if you have a PC that's running Windows and it wants to connect and to access a share on a file server, it's probably going to use NetBios. So DrayTek routers have a default data filter that's enabled to block the NetBios traffic to the internet. DrayTek routers also have a default data filter that's called Defense Worm, which also blocks NetBios traffic. This one can be turned off or changed by telnetting into the router and running the Defense Worm command that's shown on your screen. A quick note for anyone who's wondering why the spelling of defense looks a little funky. It's the American spelling with an S instead of a C that we're more familiar with. Now, in the firewall's general setup menu, we have two types of firewall filters, data filter and call filter. The call filter was used in the past when internet connections had to be started before firewall rules kicked in. Imagine the days of dial-up internet, dial-up connections. Here, if your outgoing data packet matches the firewall rule, then the router will initiate a call to stop the connection, and it's going to send the packet out to the internet. This one's been removed in later versions because by default, most modern internet connections are permanently on. And the other filter is the data filter, which is commonly used now, since most routers have a permanent internet connection, which means they are always online. The data filter is applied to both the incoming and the outgoing traffic. A quick look at the differences between the call and the data filter. For the call filter, the WAN connection is initially down and needs to be brought up before the data can be sent out through the firewall. Another colorful example on the screen, an illustration of how call filters work. Here you can see that NetBios is blocked from going to the internet, so this traffic will not bring up the WAN connection. And for the other traffic, which is not blocked, it will bring up the WAN connection and allow traffic to go to the internet. But as I mentioned earlier, this was only used for older technology connections, which were often expensive to keep online. Let's now have a look at the firewall menu options in DrayTek routers. So here's the big four: general setup, filter setup, defense setup, and diagnose. Let's go over each of these in more detail. Okay, here's where things get interesting. When you click on general setup, the call filter and data filter can be enabled or disabled. And we can configure global and default rules for filtering incoming and outgoing data. Other options include always pass inbound fragmented UDP packets, as well as enabling strict security firewall feature. The strict firewall option is going to block data packets if the web content filter or the URL filter do not act on the data going through. Let's talk about the firewall rules and how they're processed on the router. The first is the data filter sets and rules. And second, routing connections initiated from the WAN are blocked. And third is the default rule. The default rule allows selecting filtering profiles and application filters such as QoS, load balance policy, web content filter, the app enforcements, and URL content filter for data transmission via the router. Also here, you can set the firewall to either pass all or block all by default. The default settings, the pass setting, this one's enabled. The filter setup menu allows the configuration of 12 sets of firewall rules. Filter sets 1 and 2 are the default call filter and the default data filter. These were the ones that I covered earlier. The first rule is the data filter, the default one. And like I discussed, this is meant to block NetBios traffic, which is basically your port number 137 to 139 from going out to the internet. And all the other outgoing traffic is permitted to pass through. If you remember, each filter set has 7 rules. So if more rules need to be entered, you can continue into the next filter set. You just got to ensure that the next filter set is selected at the bottom of the menu. Otherwise, any subsequent rules are going to be ignored. The default settings none and will need to point to the required filter set. Now here you can see that the NetBios traffic is blocked from the internet, but all of the traffic remains unaffected. There are a number of steps to set up a firewall filter rule. Step 1 is to go to the firewall filter setup, then click set 2. Now click on rule 2 and configure the new rules. The next steps are to first select enable and enter the comments and schedule to apply. Next, edit IP filtering conditions such as the direction, the source, and the destination IP, as well as the service type, which is basically the protocol and the port. And then select the IP filter action, which is either pass or block. And finally, you select the application filter profile that has to be applied. And for filter actions, there are 4 options which can be selected, which are pass immediately, block immediately, pass if no further match, and block if there's no further match. Now, each of these 4 will process the data differently. So you'll have to ensure you have the right selection for the filter rule. For example, if you select block immediately, it's going to discard the data packets and terminate. But using block if no further match is going to hold the packet and check the subsequent rules for a match before discarding. I think it's, yeah, page number 36 to 37 on your workbook. There's going to be a detailed explanation of each of these. These have been covered in your workbooks. Now, here's an example of a firewall filter rule. We've highlighted the key parts in any filter. These are enable and comment, the direction, that's LAN to WAN, a filter action, which in this case is pass immediately, the application filter that consists of the URL content filter, the web content filter, and the DNS filter. All right, this one is slightly tricky. Another quick quiz question. I want you to take a look at the firewall setting that's pictured. Which out of these connections will not be accepted? Take a second to process this. It's a little tricky. Which of these will not be accepted? Okay, 4 options on there. A quick hint, like I mentioned, just don't forget, sequence matters. A, B, C, or D? Which one's going to be? Okay, I see a bunch of C's and 1 D. All right, I see there's a few different answers that are being discussed in chat. All right, tell you what, I see a couple of C's and a bunch of D's. Let's go over each of these options and let's try and figure out the right one. So let's look at A. From 192.168.1.23 to facebook.com. This one's going to be passed by rule 3. Now, let's look at B. 1.254 to Pokemon Go. You can see that this one is going to be passed by rule 2. Let's look at option D. From 123 to 8.8.8.8. If you notice, this one gets passed by rule 3. And that leaves us with option C, which is getting blocked by rule 1. So the answer is C, since your port 137 is blocked by rule 1. And as I mentioned, rules run in sequential order from 1 to 4. And if rule 1 says to block immediately, the data packet is going to be dropped and it's not going to process to rule 2. All right, hope that's clear. Any questions, any concerns, anything at all? The chat's open and our tech's on standby. Okay. This one's going to be fun. Time for a little hands-on demo. I'm going to pass you on to the able hands of Harvey, who's going to go through a quick demonstration of how you can configure and test the firewall filter to block port 80. If you wish to try this exercise later, this one's covered in your workbook from pages 79 to 85. So you can have a detailed instruction on there. All right, on to you, Harvey.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
All good.
Okay, good. Let me take control of the screen. Yep. So we have here our 2865. I just wanted to show the filter setup. Now you see the 2865 is no longer the cold filter, has been made obsolete. And you said also the rules are 7 rules in one page, but I think you have 12 more pages. Oh, this. Anyway, let's go back. You have more pages. And also, let me see this one. Okay. The next filter, if you use next filter, you have to come and select it here, right? So if you can put your rules in these filter sets, but if you want to use another filter rule, for example, you want to use this one, filter set 2, then you have to choose on filter set 1, use the next set filter. A lot of people get caught with that, so I just wanted to show you that. So what I've done before, I've done a small recording just to make it easier for you to follow, and we show you how to set up a firewall. We'll now start with the exercise.
Give it a second, Harvey. A few people can't see your screen. They say you're the one on the screen right now. Guys, if you can see a little window down at the bottom of your screen, maybe click on that so that brings it up.
Yeah, I got caught with that last time. On my monitor, I can see my 2927.
All right.
Yeah, people can see. Oh.
All right, people can see us. Please continue.
Scott Palmer, you can see now the screen. Yeah, David Lee. Okay, so let's continue. Or else just filter to block port 80. You will see our dashboard now of the 2927. So we go to Firewall, and we do a filter setup. And you will note that we don't have the default call filter, which existed before. With the new routers nowadays they have removed the call filter. So you have to be careful. We start straight with the default data filter, because if you don't use the default setup 1, you use the filter setup 2, then you have to put here use setup 2, right? But since we're going to add another filter here, we don't have to put the next filter set. Always be careful about that. Okay, so here I will set up a filter rule. I give it a name block 80. The direction will be LAN to 1, and the source I will use my PC, which is on 192.168.1.10. You just edit and then you put the IP address here. And a service type, I will block port 80, user defined. And then you can select ADP, UDP, I select TCP. The source port is any one between 65,000 and destination port 80. I'll block port 80. And filter action will be blocked immediately. So the filter is ready. We can diagnose it. So we'll do a TCP test from source 192.168.1.10. Source port is 80. And I want to do a test on the Google IP, Google website, the destination port 80. And I click on analyze. Immediately you can see it's blocked. And if you want to do the same thing on using another port, port 443, for example, which is not blocked, do the same analyze, and you will see that the status pass. Now we will test also using a website, for example, http blog.gp. And you will see, since it's accessing port 80 on HTTP, it's blocked. Now we will try a HTTPS site like the DrayTek.com.au website, and here you are. This proves that the filter is working perfectly. So here ends our exercise 1. Yep. So that's the end of the exercise 1. You can take over Java.
Thank you. Right, I hope my screen's back up.
Yep. But yeah.
Here we are. Okay, that was fun. Thanks for that, Harvey.
All right.
I'm going to summarize what we've done and discussed so far. We've discussed the firewall basics, which include the types of firewalls and their categories. We took a look at the DrayTek Firewall facilities, including data filter and call filter. And we went through the DrayTek Firewall menu, followed by a quick hands-on demo of setting up and testing a filter. Well, not bad for 45 minutes. We're going to have a short break now and come back in 5 minutes when Darren's going to take over the second part of the workshop. So please go right ahead and grab a coffee. And during the break, if you have any questions at all, please type them in the chat box and we'll respond to you. See you in 5.
Darren. No, I can't hear you, Darren.
Unmute yourself, Darren. Maybe play the break video. Grab a cuppa.
I still can't hear you.
Now?
Okay, that's much better.
Nice.
Terrible microphone. It's got a dodgy connection. If I knock it or something, it goes off again. All right, I'm going to play a video that goes for about 5 minutes while you're away getting a cup of coffee. So you may have to click on the window if you can't see it displaying. And just bear in mind, we get a bit of audio lag over Teams when we play videos. So just try to ignore that the best you can.
Hi everyone, Darren from DrayTek Australia and New Zealand. Now at first glance you might assume that the Vigor 2962 routers are just upgraded versions of the old Vigor 2960 router. They're the same size and shape and even the names are similar. However, a closer look reveals that these are better thought of as whole new products. The Vigor 2960 was a dual WAN router with 2 gigabit WAN ports and 4 gigabit LAN ports. If we look at the Vigor 2962 series, we see 5 ports marked as WAN LAN. That means they can either be WAN ports or LAN ports. Port P2 is shared with an SFP slot, meaning you can use either the RJ45 gigabit Ethernet port there, or the SFP slot if you have a direct fiber internet connection, or if you want to use it as a LAN port to uplink to a switch with either optic fiber modules and a cable, or using a DAC cable. DAC cables are a copper cable with SFP connectors at both ends. DrayTek have the DAC CX10 cables available in either 1 or 3 meter lengths, which support anything from 1 up to 10 gigabits a second, making them a viable and cost-effective solution over optic fiber. Next, you may notice port 1 is marked differently to the other ports. The reason for that is it'll support up to 2.5 gigabits per second instead of just 1. It also can either be LAN or WAN. And over on the right, we have 2 dedicated gigabit LAN ports. If we go to the web user interface, towards the top of the menu on the left, we see port setup. So here we can change ports 1 to 4 from WAN to LAN or vice versa. So if you wanted to use port 1 as a LAN port to take advantage of that 2.5 gigabits per second data rate there, or if you wanted to use the SFP port at P2 as a LAN port to uplink to a switch, for example, but you still need 2 gigabit WAN ports, you can then change ports 3 and 4 to WAN. What you can't do is have more than 2 WANs. If you try that, you get this pop-up telling you that's a no. We can also manually specify the speed we want each port to run at. Port 1, for example, we can leave at auto, or we can set it to either 2.5 gigabits per second or 1 gigabit per second, or 100 or even 10 megabits per second. Port 2 and all of the other ports are 1 gigabits per second ports, and you can throttle those down to 100 or 10 megabits per second if you have a need to. The other physical change is that telltale blue inside the USB port 2, indicating it supports the USB 3 standard. Both USB ports will allow connection of USB hard drives from firmware version 3.9.4, which is yet to be released at the time of this video. The difference between the USB ports is that the top one supports the USB 2 standard, which allows up to 480 megabits per second, while the bottom one can go up to 10 times faster at 4.8 gigabits per second, so keep that in mind when connecting a hard drive. Around the back we have an on-off button and a socket for an IEC power cable, so it has a built-in power supply like all good rack mountable products should. Yes, it is rack mountable, and rack mount brackets and screws are included. Also in the box is a power cable, an Ethernet cable, a product registration card, and a quick start guide. A full manual can be downloaded from our website. I'll leave a link to that below. There's also a leaflet explaining the terms of the general public license of the router's operating system. One other physical change is there's also another model in the Vigor 2962 series called the Vigor 2962P. The P stands for Power over Ethernet, which can power external devices like IP cameras and phones. It has a power budget of 60 watts, which it can put out on ports 1, 4, 5 and 6. Performance-wise, we've gone from 900 megabits per second in the Vigor 2960 up to a massive 2.2 gigabits per second, which comes courtesy of a new hardware acceleration processor, which is enabled by default. IPsec throughput goes from 600 megabits per second up to 800 megabits per second, and SSL VPN throughput increases to 500 megabits per second, up from 300 megabits per second. And that's where these routers really stand out. Massive amounts of throughput to handle lots of concurrent VPNs. The Vigor 2962 supports up to 200 PPTP, L2TP, IPsec, L2TP over IPsec VPNs, and up to 50 SSL or Open VPNs. The Vigor 2962 features high availability mode, which allows for a second Vigor 2962 to be added to the network in a master-slave arrangement. In the event of the master unit failing, the slave unit will take over to ensure uninterrupted network access. The Vigor 2962 series can also be managed using the Vigor ACS2 or Vigor ACS3 central management applications. So that is DrayTek's Vigor 2962 series router range, which come with a 2-year backed base warranty.
Okay, no worries. So what are we at? 12:53 here. Everyone still hear me okay? Give me a thumbs up, Joe. I can see you in the middle of the screen. Yep, no worries. Okay. All right. So do we want to get straight into it or wait a few more minutes?
I think we can start. So it's been 5.
Yeah, just go ahead. All right. So it starts off with just an outline of what we're going to cover anyway. So for anyone who didn't catch it before, my name's Darren and I'll be taking over the second half of the Firewall workshop today. So I'll be picking up from where Joe left off, and we'll have a more detailed look at content security management. We'll also look at object-based firewalls, DOS defense, some firewall diagnostics, and some tips to improve network security. All right, so let's start by looking at content security management, abbreviated to CSM. CSM is basically an application filter which is used to control access to several internet applications, as well as URL and web content filtering. There's 4 categories which CSM can inspect. Those are app enforcement, URL enforcement, URL content, web categories, and DNS content. The first one we'll look at is app enforcement, which is abbreviated as APPE, app enforcement, in the router interface. This blocks a variety of applications within several categories. Those include instant messaging, VoIP, peer-to-peer, protocols, tunneling, streaming, remote control, and web HD. So the router recognizes which application the client is using by comparing the data flow pattern of the app to its database. To create an APPE profile, go to CSM App Enforcement Profile and select the application from the list. You can see from the screenshot here there's quite a large variety of applications that can be selected to be applied to the firewall filter. There's a mechanism to upgrade the APPE signature automatically, which you'll find under CSM APPE signature upgrade in the router interface. DrayTek periodically updates the apps supported by the routers, and you can either check that manually here or set it to run to a schedule automatically, either hourly, daily or weekly. You will have to activate the license first though. Well, it's not necessary to have an APPE license activated to use APPE enforcement in firewall rules. It allows the routers to upgrade the APPE module, automatically keeping the router's app database up to date. The license is free though and can be activated if the router has been registered to a Vigor account. Now to activate the service, you see there at the top right corner of the screen under CSM App Signature Upgrade, then just click on that Activate button. The license will expire after 365 days, but you just need to reactivate the license again to keep getting the updates. To see all of the current versions of the apps that the router can enforce, go to CSM App Signature Upgrade menu and then click on the APPE support list link. That'll show this table here with the version number of each application. Okay, the next CSM menu option we'll look at is the URL content filter, which is abbreviated to just UCF. The URL content filter is used to control access to specific websites based on keywords in the URL. As shown in this diagram, the router inspects the HTTP traffic and checks if the host name, that is the URL, contains certain keywords, which can then be used to control access to those websites. Be aware that a website can use several URLs, so you'll need to include all of those in the URL filter if you want to block that website. For example, Facebook.com also uses FB.com, so you need to block both Facebook and FB. HTTPS websites are a little more difficult because they're encrypted, but we have a way around that using the DNS filter function, which I'll cover shortly. All right, the steps involved in creating a URL content filter are: first, create a keyword object in the Object Setting Keyword Object menu. Second, go to CSM's UCF profile and configure a profile. 3, enable URL access control. 4, select the action as either pass or block. And lastly, select the keyword object you would like to pass or block. The next menu option is the Web Content Filter, or WCF. DrayTek's Web Content Filter blocks undesirable web content based on the configuration in the router. It can help a workplace by filtering out web content that can affect productivity, such as limiting social networking during work hours, or for homeworks maybe where you might want it to be homework time or bedtime for your kids. It can also remove potential threats from the internet, as well as blocking inappropriate content. So how it works is websites around the world are placed into 64 categories in a database maintained by Cyren, that's C-Y-R-E-N. Categories include social networking, shopping, news, and more. Those categories can then be selected to be either blocked or permitted and be applied to required user groups. So for example, your kids at home can be prevented from accessing adult sites, or employees in the workplace can be restricted from getting into social networking during work hours. So it eliminates the need to create and maintain a huge list of URLs to block. You can either choose to block or pass a specific category and control access to all the websites that fall into that class without specifying them all individually or trying to come up with a massive list of keywords. This one does require an annual subscription, but DrayTek routers do come with a 30-day trial, so you can give it a go before deciding if you want to buy it. The mechanism WCF uses to decide if a website should be blocked or allowed is, firstly, the router receives an HTTP request from a LAN client and sends a query to the Cyren WCF server to check the category of the URL. If the web category matches the router WCF setting profile in the router to either block or permit, then it is applied to the relevant firewall filters. In the router, the Web Content Filter configuration menu is found under CSM Web Content Filter Profile. Up to 8 profiles can be created and then applied to firewall filters. Right, the steps to create a web content filter are: first, go to the CSM WCF profile menu in the router. Then 1, enable the profile. 2, select the action to pass or block. 3, select the category you would like to either pass or block. And 4, set up a black or white list to block or pass certain websites. If you want to check a website category, go to www.siren.com/url-category.check check.html. You can also use this site if you want to report a mistakenly classified URL. Okay, another quick quiz for you. Which of the following cannot be achieved by DrayTek Vigor routers to control access to Facebook? So we're looking for something here that the router can't do. So A, only block Facebook during work hours. B, only allow access to Facebook for the marketing department. C, only block political posts on Facebook. Or D, only block Facebook games. Please raise your hand if you know the answer, or you can use the chat box to write down your answer like we did before. So anyone got an answer for me there? I see they're coming in. And we've got a bunch of C's, C. Yep, lots of C's. Okay, yes, the answer is of course C. Since we can't inspect the website contents itself, we can only block the whole website. So with A there, we can only block Facebook during working hours. Yes, we can do that. B, only allow access for one group on our network. Yes, we can do that. D, block Facebook games. This one's a bit tricky. We can do this one in this case because Facebook games are hosted on another domain. Right, now why? Let me just check something here. That's all right. Something going on with my little chat link there. All right, the last menu option we'll look at is the DNS filter. This is an extension of the URL filter and web content filter. If the web server is using HTTPS and the traffic is encrypted, the router may not be able to check the contents in those packets. However, by tracing the DNS queries sent by the LAN clients, the router can check which websites the LAN clients are trying to access. The DNS filter allows network administrators to block or pass DNS queries that contain specific keywords and therefore control access to those websites. The DNS filter can be applied to the URL content filter and web content filter under CSM DNS filter in the router interface. Now there's two parts to the DNS filter settings. Those are the DNS filter profile and the DNS filter local setting. We only need to use one of them to make the DNS filter work, and the choice depends on the DNS server being used. That is whether it's local DNS or an external DNS server. The setting to be used depends on the setting of the LAN client. If it's set for an external DNS server, such as Google DNS, then the DNS filter profile is used. If it's set to local DNS, being the router's LAN IP address, then the DNS local filter is used. So that's our 4 types of CSM categories. The next step is once the CSM profiles are created, they need to be applied to the required firewall filter rules. A summary of the steps here is: create the CSM profiles, select the profile in a filter rule, using IP filter criteria to apply the CSM to a specific LAN host or hosts. An example of a URL content filter being applied to a firewall filter is shown here in this screenshot. Okay, let's now look at object-based firewall configuration. So what's an object? An object might be a single IP address or a group of IP addresses or service types, keywords or file extensions. Each object has a unique name that makes it easier to identify when you're creating your rules. Objects are reusable and can be applied to multiple firewall rules. One example might be create a firewall keyword object for Facebook and then use it to only allow the marketing department to get to it while blocking everyone else, like we did in our quiz. And you might use it another rule that allows access outside of work hours for another group. You create objects in the object setting menu in the router interface. In the example here, we can select an object or an object group to apply to the source IP or country setting in our firewall filter rule. To explain groups a little more, in the top example here, we're creating an IP object called accounting. In the bottom example, we're then including that in an IP group along with another IP object called admin. Both of these objects can then be applied to a single firewall filter rule by selecting the group, which we've named confidential here. Here we have a list of the different types of objects that can be created and used in firewall filters. So we have IPv4 and IPv6 objects, service type objects, which are based on protocols and port ranges, keyword objects, file extension objects, and country objects, which can be used to block or allow IP addresses from certain countries. Okay, I'll pass you on to Harvey now, who will go through a demo of how to use CSM and set up a URL filter with DNS filter to block a HTTPS website. Detailed instructions are available in the workbook on page 95 to 102 if you want to try it again later. We also have a video on YouTube which goes through much the same example using the URL filter with DNS filter if you want to watch that later as well. You'll find the link in section 9 in the workshop manual. That's on page 63. Roy might even put that link in the chat box for us. Okay, over to you, Harvey.
Thank you. You get me? Yep. All right. So we'll go again with a small video I recorded earlier to show that how the HTTPS filter can work. Okay. Now we will try a more difficult filter. We will try to filter out a HTTPS website. We have our 2865 router ready now, and our one is working. And we try Facebook. Facebook is an HTTPS website. So if we try that, fine, it's working. If we try another one, which is called fb.com, and this also turns you back to Facebook, and it's an HTTPS site. And if I copy that, I put it back here, you will see it's an HTTPS website. So our Facebook website is working. We will try to block that. And since HTTPS websites has encrypted packets, it's difficult to block the packets according to only the content, the URL contents. And now what we will try to use a combination of URL content with a DNS filter and see if we can get around that. So first of all, we'll create a keyword object. And we call this Facebook, and we put the contents like Facebook or FB, and it says a maximum of 3 words and 63 characters are limited in each profile index. So this one is, the index is created, a keyword object. Now we will go to a URL content filter. Under CSM, URL content filter, we create a profile. We call it block Facebook. The priority is either URL control first. We enable the URL content access control, and the action is block. And we will use our keyword, which we created before. It appears like this one. We remember the keyword object we just created before. So now this is set up. We have also a DNS filter profile, which we enable, and we select the UCF block face URL content filter we created before, right? And then we accept filter, and we create a DNS filter. Call it again block Facebook, and the URL filter content filter. We select the UCF, the content filter before. Now we are using a URL content filter, and the syslog will only show block only actions. So we click OK. So now we have our DNS filter. We have a URL content filter. We have our object field, keyword content, keyword object, and the content is Facebook and FB. Now we will go to the firewall and create a rule for that. We take the same default data filter. The first one is always there by default. So we take the second one. We call it, we enabled it. We call it a block Facebook. The direction is LAN to WAN, any source, any IP, and we select pass immediately. Even if we're going to block packets, we say pass immediately. But on the URL content filter, we select the one which we have created, and the DNS filter is the one that we have also created. So we click OK. Our Facebook is working. So if I take another browser, I try to Facebook, it doesn't work. So I try to do facebook.com. This also, you get a web page saying which has been blocked by the URL content filter. But since before we started this exercise, I showed you the Facebook which appeared. So now if I tried it again, it will still work because the cache, you need to clear the cache, right? So don't get caught by that. If I do facebook.com like we did before, and this also will work because of cache. So I will show you straight away how I clear the cache. And then hopefully when I try it again, the Facebook and the fb.com, it's blocked. So this proves that the HTTPS websites are being blocked now. That concludes the second exercise. Okay, thank you. Well, Darren, back to you. It's all right. I can't hear you, Darren.
Hear me now?
Good. Yeah, that's right.
Yep, no worries. I might have to get this headset replaced. I think that microphone's terrible on it. Okay. Righto, thanks for that, Harvey. A summary of the steps that Harvey took us through there to block a HTTPS website are, firstly, create a keyword object, then create a URL content filter to use the keyword object. That's for DrayOS models. Here we also configure the DNS filter, then use the URL content filter in a firewall filter rule. So there's a link to the workshop manual there if you want to run through that again anyway. Okay, let's now look at denial of service or DOS defense. As shown here, denial of service or DOS is a networking attack making the machine unavailable due to flooding with fake connection requests. The DOS defense functionality in DrayTek routers helps detect and block these. The attacks are usually categorized into two types, that's flooding type attacks and vulnerability attacks. Flooding type attacks attempt to flood exhaust a system's resources by basically hammering it with so many requests that the server or the router shuts down, or it just bogs down so much that it becomes inaccessible. And vulnerability attacks will try to paralyze the system by taking advantage of the vulnerabilities of a protocol or maybe the operating system. Most DrayTek routers now include DOS defense and spoofing defense in the defense setup menu. Later firmware versions now also have a white and blacklist option. This allows the entry of up to 16 IPv4 or IPv6 addresses, which can then be allowed or blocked through DOS defense. That comes in handy when it comes to VoIP, for example. Since VoIP uses UDP for transmission, you'd otherwise need to ensure that a high enough threshold for UDP flood defense is set before UDP packets are dropped so that there's no interruption to VoIP services. A better way to overcome this problem instead is by adding the IP addresses of the phone system to the whitelist. I'll talk more about that and UDP thresholds in a moment. Okay, so here's a configuration example in how to enable DOS defense. Firstly, go to Firewall DOS defense, click on Enable DOS defense, click Enable UDP flood defense, and enter the threshold number. The threshold number is calculated according to internet bandwidth, so you may need to adjust that according to what you have, taking into consideration any services such as VoIP, like I just mentioned, that you don't want to accidentally block. But rather than allow for that, you can just whitelist the phone system. So assuming we've whitelisted the IP addresses of our phone system, to work out our packets per second threshold, the equation to use is data flow in megabits per second times 1 million divided by 8 divided by MTU. In this case, we have a 24 megabits per second connection and our MTU is 1500. So we have 24 times a million divided by 8 divided by 1500, which gives us 2000. Here's a general guide for other bandwidth levels. So if you have 20 megabits per second, go for 2000 packets a second and so on. And you'll find that equation on page 68 in the manual if you want to refer to it again later. To receive Syslog alerts about denial of service events, go to System Maintenance Syslog Mail Alert Setup to enable firewall logs. So A, click Enable, B, enter the server IP, C, click the firewall log box, and D, click the OK button to apply the settings. Then you'll see those under the Firewall tab in the DrayTek Syslog utility. You'll also receive an alert from the router when the router is under attack. Here in this Syslog, we can see UDP flood being blocked by DOS defense. Our next webinar is about the Syslog utility and Syslogs in general, so be sure to check that out on next Tuesday. To whitelist any false positives or blacklist any known troublesome IP addresses, go to Firewall DOS Defense, click Enable DOS Defense, and click on the white or blacklist option, which you'll see in the red box on the right-hand side of this screenshot. And that brings up this menu page. So here, enter the IP addresses into either the whitelist or blacklist. Whitelist, of course, is allowed IP addresses, and blacklist is the IP addresses to be blocked. Let's now look at spoofing defense in DrayTek routers. A spoofing attack is when a malicious party impersonates another device or user on the network in order to launch attacks against network hosts or steal data, spread malware, or bypass access controls. The two most common methods are ARP spoofing attacks and IP address spoofing. In an ARP spoofing attack, a malicious party sends spoofed ARP messages across a local area network in order to link the attacker's MAC address with the IP address of a legitimate member of the network. This type of attack results in data that is intended for the host's IP address getting sent to the attacker instead. Malicious parties commonly use ARP spoofing to steal information, modify data in transit, or stop traffic on a LAN. ARP spoofing attacks can also be used to facilitate other types of attacks, such as denial of service or session hijacking and man-in-the-middle attacks. ARP spoofing only works on local area networks that use the address resolution protocol. In an IP address spoofing attack, an attacker sends IP packets from a false or spoofed source address in order to disguise itself. Denial of service attacks often use IP spoofing to overload networks and devices with packets that appear to be from legitimate source IP addresses. DrayTek routers include spoofing defense under the Firewall Defense Setup Spoofing Defense menu page that you see here. It includes a number of options to select for both ARP spoofing defense and IP spoofing defense. The two default options are: 1. Block IP packets from WAN with an inconsistent source IP address. While receiving packets from the WAN, the router will check if the source IP address and the coming WAN interface checks out and seems reasonable. If not, the router will drop the packet instead of forwarding it to the internal server. An example of that is if the router's local IP address is 192.168.1.1 and it receives a packet from the WAN with IP 192.168.1.100 that is in the same subnet, the router will assume that's dodgy, drop the packet and add it to the defense log. 2. Block IP packet from LAN with consistent source IP addresses. So same thing, when receiving packets from the LAN, this time with this option enabled, the router will check if the source IP and the coming LAN interface seem reasonable. If not, the router will drop the packet and add an entry to the log. Okay, another quick quiz. Do DrayTek routers keep a log of online attacks? Let me know a Y or an N in the chat box there. Okay, do the routers keep a log of online attacks? Lots of yeses coming in. The answer is yes, it does. However, you do need to enable the log function so the syslog will be collected. Okay, let's have a look at the firewall diagnostic tools available in DrayTek routers. The first one we'll look at is the Firewall Diagnose tool. We saw Harvey use this one in the first demo he took us through in part 1. This is really useful if you want to check which filter rule is used by the DrayTek router. You'll find it under Firewall Diagnose menu as shown here. So we can verify the filter rule by using either ICMP, UDP or TCP. The direction of the packet can also be set to from LAN or from WAN, and then you'll need to fill in the source and destination IP addresses. You can also specify a MAC address. For UDP and TCP, you'll also need to specify the port. Then click on Analyze to run the test. And here we have a sample screenshot of the results of the analysis. You can see here that our test passed the default rule, which might indicate either a win or fail depending on what you're expecting to see. Another diagnostic tool is DOS flood table. Here the router provides information to track flooding attacks coming in, which will allow you to identify potentially malicious network traffic. You'll find it in the Diagnostics DOS flood table menu. When DOS flooding occurs, you'll see a red X in the table indicating that the IP address has been blocked on this port. You then have the option to block this IP address completely or add it to the whitelist. For example, a phone might generate UDP flooding, but you still want to use that device, so you can add it to the whitelist so that it isn't blocked. Okay, we've now come to the final topic on today's agenda, where we'll use what we learned to look at ways to improve network security. So as network admins, most of you will be aware of the increasing number of reports of cyber attacks against many companies, from network intrusions or security vulnerabilities, and you might be responsible for a company network and relied upon to harden network security for that company. I'll shortly go over some steps you can take to improve network security. As listed here, cyber attacks can come in a number of forms. Those can be denial of service attacks, spoofing attacks, attempts to log into the firewall router, or attempts to gain access to internal servers through a dial-in VPN connection. The widely publicised ransomware attacks are usually initiated by clicking on an email from a hacker or clicking on a link in a dodgy website or on an infected web page. While the router's web content filter will help in blocking some websites, it can't check emails or websites for infected content. For that, you'll need to rely on antivirus software and telling everyone to be smart and not open suspicious emails or web pages. It's a good practice to check the router syslogs on a regular basis to see if there's been attempts to gain access to your network. So in the example here, there's an attempted login from the internet. Here's another example. This one is an attempted VPN login. These two examples will give you an idea of what to look for when checking the syslogs. There's a number of things you can do to improve network security. So firstly, ensure that the router has the latest firmware version installed, as it usually includes the latest security patches. Another tip is to use secure passwords for admin login and all VPN profiles, and remember to change them fairly often. Another tip is to change the management ports in the router. The default ports used are well known, so changing the values to different numbers will make it a bit more difficult for hackers to guess. A more secure way to manage a router is to disable management from the internet and use VPN to access the router management page instead. You can also enable brute force protection in the management setup page. Brute force for VPN will be introduced in upcoming firmware versions. An example of a brute force attack is a hacker trying to log into the router remotely. They have no idea what the password is, so they'll try every possible passphrase until eventually they get a correct one. Enabling brute force protection allows the router to identify the IP address that has failed lots and lots of login attempts and block them for a set period. Using an access list for management access will only allow connections to the management page from selected IP addresses and the corresponding subnet. Other things you can do are disable any services and VPN profiles that aren't needed. For example, if you don't use OpenVPN or PPTP or remote management, turn all those off from the WAN. If the VPN service is enabled, use the access list feature or specify the VPN peer IP to restrict VPN access. Record the syslog and turn on mail alerts and review the logs periodically. While an abnormal attack is occurring, enable DOS defense and block these IPs by using the blacklist. Re-sign and change the default security certificates or for SSL or HTTPS access. Consider using two-factor authentication for web and VPN login. And consider using higher security VPN protocols such as IPsec 509 for LAN-to-LAN and SSL plus MOTP for host-to-LAN VPN connections. Additional information on what you can do to secure your network is available in the application notes listed here. You'll find these links on page 86 of the manual as well. Oh, Roy's just copied them into the chat box as well. Okay, so in this second session, we looked at content security management and the different components that make up CSM. And we also looked at some configuration examples, including a hands-on demo from Harvey. We also looked at how objects can be used in firewall configurations to simplify configuration tasks. Other topics we looked at were DOS defense and firewall diagnostics. And finally, we looked at some tips to help you to improve on your network security. And now we have 15 minutes or so if you'd like to ask any questions. If you can't hang around, please fill out our survey to let us know how we went. Let us know what you liked or didn't like, or what you think needs some work. Roy might add a link to that in our chat box for us now. Filling that out will also qualify you for $100 off a Vigor 2962, 2962P or a Vigor 3910. That's reseller price XGST, limited to 1 unit per participant and valid until, was it the end of the month?
30th of September.
30th of September. No worries. Okay, thanks everyone for coming along today. We hope it was helpful in developing your knowledge of DrayTek's firewall features. Don't forget to fill out that survey before you go. And if you're not subscribed to our newsletter to receive a heads up about our next workshops, please drop us an email to sales@draytek.com.au. Okay, over to you, Edward.
Thanks, Darren. Well done.
Okay,
Thanks to everyone who joined in. If you need any help at all, sales@draytek.com.au or support@draytek.com.au. You can reach me at 0298388899. We do have time for questions. It's an open floor for the next 15 minutes. Any feedback, any questions, anything at all, let us know. I see we have our MD online as well. So if Ming would like to have a quick word with the participants, Edward, perhaps you can highlight Ming.
You need the microphone to be on, Ming. Yeah.
Hi.
Okay.
Hi. Yeah. Yes, I want to thank every participant for this event. Yeah, we try our best to support our customers in all across Australia and New Zealand, and yeah. However, it's a two-way process. So thank you all for coming. Firewall is a very important and tricky functions. It's like a security guard for any businesses or places. I think Roy and our guys have done our best to make the issues clear for everyone. But if there's still issues, please contact us anytime, from anywhere, and we will try to help. Other than that, yes, your feedback is very important. So not just for today. I think ongoing communications is also important for us in island technology and for your own businesses, and your feedback can help us to improve in the right direction. Of course, we always keep a close contact with DrayTek, the manufacturer of DrayTek routers, and so it's important for us to keep this communications open. So half of Australia is in lockdown, or partial lockdown at the moment. So everyone, please do the right thing. Keep yourself and family and friends safe. Don't go to a beach party even if you're invited. And take the injection when you can. All right. Yeah, that's what I want to say for now. Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Ming.
Okay.
Thanks to everyone who joined in as well. Please do fill out that form. We value your feedback, and it's going to help us with our subsequent sessions. A DrayTek certification would be ideal, I agree. But currently, we don't have that option available. It is definitely being considered, I can tell you that. Hopefully, when things normalize a bit, we should be able to offer some more hands-on sessions, perhaps a day-long session like we used to do before these crazy times set in. And yeah, see, there's a bit of a concern about the stock availability. I do agree, Anton. DrayTek has been struggling to keep up with the demands of the market. As you know, ever since the lockdown started, there was a surge in demand for most of our products. But I do need to share a bit of a good news with everyone. DrayTek has introduced a few new models, and they feature the GFast function, which is going to work with our XDSL technology here in Australia. So we are expecting a bunch of new models, things that will help you just to tide over these crazy times. I think in the next couple of weeks, you should be getting a notification about these new models being launched for the market. The Vigor 130s, I know, have been out for a while. So 166 and 167s perhaps should be coming in the next, hopefully in the next, by the end of September or earlier. We'll keep you updated via newsletters. And I know we don't have LTE models, but we do have the non-LTE options available. So we're just trying our best to keep up giving our recommendations of the available alternatives, and really appreciate the support that all of our partners have been showing at this time. This is something that has impacted industries worldwide, and we're no exception. But through these times, I think the brand is going to come out stronger. And with your feedback, we should be able to tide through and come out better on the other end. Any questions, anything at all, please feel free to reach out.
So just trying to track down the correct link for the survey form.
That one's been posted, isn't it?
Yeah, the link we've been posting up is for the sign up for the workshop. It's not the survey form.
Roy might have that. Roy, do you?
No, I haven't got the survey. So it looks. What I'll do, I'll email everybody the survey form this afternoon. So if you get the correct link, and then I'll send an email later today. And I also will send the link for the recording for today. So it should be finished processing by this afternoon sometime or tomorrow. So everyone watch the session again if they missed something.
I found it.
Okay, so you found the form.
There we go. Is that feedback form? I'm going to post that in our chat box now. All right, looks like we can possibly wrap up the session for now. Thanks to everyone who joined in. Once again, stay safe, stay masked, get vaccinated.
Okay, guys, stay safe.
All right.
All
Thank
right.
you for your time,
Thank you.
everyone.
Okay.
If anyone's got any
Goodbye.
questions, they can always email us later.
Yeah,
So,
Yes.
support at draytek.com.au for any questions. Sales at draytek.com.au for anything else.
okay. And we've got a webinar next week if they want to attend as well. That's
We're
on
going to
the
discuss
Syslog.
Syslog analysis in our next webinar. Just search for DrayTek Australia New Zealand on YouTube. You'll see all of our webinars. All the content we've ever produced is on there. And this training is going to be available there too. All right. Signing off now. Thanks everyone for your time. Bye-bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. See you
Yeah.
later.